One wrong decision on an ordinary day can now undo years of legal life in the United States. A routine traffic stop, a moment of poor judgment, or even a verbal admission can suddenly place a non-citizen under immigration scrutiny. This is no longer speculation or online fear talk. A newly announced immigration reform law has changed how the U.S. government views and enforces rules against non-citizens, including lawful permanent residents who once believed their status provided strong protection. This reform is not a small adjustment to paperwork or visa timelines. It represents a deeper shift in enforcement philosophy. The law redraws the boundaries of risk and responsibility for anyone who is not a U.S. citizen. As a result, actions that once carried limited immigration consequences can now trigger life-changing outcomes. For millions of immigrants living, studying, or working in the U.S., the margin for error has narrowed dramatically. What makes this development especially significant is how quietly it restructures the system. Instead of focusing narrowly on undocumented immigration, the reform expands federal authority across all non-citizens. Students, temporary workers, asylum applicants, visa holders, and green card holders are now examined through a much broader enforcement lens. This marks a major departure from how immigration law has traditionally distinguished between different legal statuses. Another reason this law carries weight is the rare bipartisan support behind it. In a deeply divided political environment, immigration laws that gain backing from both parties tend to have staying power. Lawmakers have presented this reform as a balanced approach that rewards compliance while imposing tougher consequences for violations. But the definition of what counts as a serious violation has expanded far beyond what many immigrants expected. One of the most impactful changes is the reclassification of all non-citizens into a single enforcement category. In practical terms, this means green card holders are no longer treated as a protected group separate from temporary visa holders. From an enforcement standpoint, permanent residence no longer offers the same buffer it once did. This shift alone has reshaped the legal reality for millions of families who believed their status was secure. The most controversial element of the reform involves driving under the influence, commonly known as DUI. Under previous rules, immigration consequences for DUI were generally tied to repeated offenses or aggravating circumstances. A first-time misdemeanor DUI rarely led to deportation for permanent residents. That standard has now changed. Under the new law, a single DUI conviction can place any non-citizen into deportation proceedings, regardless of how long they have lived in the United States. The length of residency, tax history, and family ties no longer outweigh this enforcement trigger. For many immigrants, this represents a sudden and alarming shift in risk. Even more concerning is the fact that a criminal conviction is not always required. Immigration law operates under different standards than criminal courts. In certain situations, an admission to conduct that meets the elements of a DUI offense can be enough to initiate immigration action. This means that statements made during legal processes or administrative interactions can have consequences far beyond what many people realize. The reform also expands grounds of inadmissibility, a term that carries long-term consequences. Being deemed inadmissible does not just affect entry into the U.S. It can block status adjustments, green card renewals, visa extensions, and future immigration benefits. A DUI-related finding can permanently alter an immigrant's legal future, even without jail time. Another critical aspect of the law is federal supremacy over state classifications. States vary widely in how they treat DUI offenses, with some classifying first-time cases as minor misdemeanors. Under this reform, state labels no longer matter. At the federal immigration level, a DUI is treated uniformly, eliminating local discretion and nuance. This has effectively dismantled a long-standing assumption among permanent residents that a green card offers near-permanent security. The reform makes it clear that lawful permanent residence is conditional and revocable. A single qualifying offense can now place a long-term resident into removal proceedings, regardless of past compliance. The law also tightens standards related to good moral character, a key requirement for U.S. citizenship. A DUI offense now disrupts the ability to meet this requirement for the necessary period. This means that even immigrants who are not deported may find their path to citizenship delayed or blocked entirely, reinforcing the growing divide between permanent residence and full legal security. The real-world consequences are already becoming clear. A person who has lived in the U.S. for 10 or 15 years, worked legally, and supported a family could now face removal for an offense that previously carried limited immigration impact. For students and temporary workers, the outcomes are often faster and harsher, including immediate loss of status and forced departure. Immigration attorneys and advocacy groups have raised serious concerns about how this law will affect behavior within immigrant communities. Many fear it will discourage cooperation with law enforcement, even in cases where immigrants are victims or witnesses. Critics argue that treating all DUI-related cases the same ignores differences in severity and context. Supporters of the reform defend it as a necessary public safety measure. Lawmakers point to the dangers associated with impaired driving and argue that non-citizens should be held to the highest standards of conduct. From this perspective, living in the U.S. without citizenship is a privilege that carries stricter expectations. It is important to note that the reform does include provisions aimed at improving legal immigration processes. Certain visa categories may benefit from faster processing, and clearer guidelines have been introduced for employment-based immigrants. However, for many people, these positives are overshadowed by the expanded enforcement powers and heightened risks. The immediate takeaway for immigrant communities is clear. Maintaining a clean record has never been more critical. The gap between criminal consequences and immigration consequences has widened, and understanding that distinction is now essential. Legal awareness is no longer optional. As this law is implemented, many questions remain about discretion and enforcement practices. But the overall direction is unmistakable. Immigration policy is moving towards stricter standards, broader authority, and reduced tolerance for violations. This reform sends a powerful message about the future of U.S. immigration. Citizenship is increasingly the only status that guarantees long-term stability. For everyone else, the rules are tighter, the scrutiny is sharper, and staying informed has become a necessity, not a choice.